Are you wondering what insulin resistance does to the body? Maybe you recently got diagnosed with insulin resistance, or you think you might have insulin resistance. My name is Dr. Terranella, and in this video, we're going to look at two of the key areas that insulin resistance, two of the key ways that insulin resistance affects the body, and how this affects the body and some of the negative impacts of insulin resistance. So if you're curious how insulin resistance affects the body and what it's doing to negatively affect your health, keep watching. We're going to get into the details. We're all about helping you gain a deeper understanding of your health and what's going on with your body. Hopefully this video gets you a little bit closer towards that aim. I also wanted to point out that sometimes when I'm producing this content, I get a statistic wrong or the name of something wrong, and almost always there's a corresponding blog article on our website, SW Integrated Medicine /blog. You can find it there. Those oftentimes go into a little bit more detail than the videos do as well, so please check that out if you're interested. It does take considerable effort to produce this content, so if you're liking the information, please click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you do have questions about any of the content, please ask it in the comment section here or on the blog. That's why I'm producing the information, for you to gain that deeper understanding. So ask the questions if you have them. Hope you enjoy the video. Thank you for watching. Let's get into it. So what does insulin resistance do to the body? When I think about this question, I kind of put it into two buckets: the effect of glucose on the body and the effect of insulin on the body. And in simple terms, we can look at the effect of glucose on it's mainly affecting the microvessels of the body. So you think about the things, the vessels like the nerves and the eyes, and some of the other parts of the body where you start to see complications from high blood sugar, like neuropathy and things like that. And then with the insulin, there's also the effect on the macrovessels, so the arteries of the heart and all the large peripheral arteries, like the things that go into the legs, etc. So those are kind of two broad ways to look at it, but it's much more nuanced than that. There's more broader effects of glucose and broader effects of insulin outside of these two simple areas. So let's look at the effect of glucose in a little more depth so we can kind of understand how it's affecting the body as a whole. So when glucose interacts with proteins of the body, it causes the glucose to bind to those proteins, and it doesn't need an enzyme or anything like that. Just by the simple interaction of those two molecules, an amino acid and a sugar or glucose molecule, causes this glycation process to occur. And the more glucose in your blood, the more glycation that's going to occur to the proteins of your body. And this damages those proteins, making them more stiff, less pliable. And you can think of this as like in the case of like hardening of the arteries, because that is partially what's responsible for that. So this glycation occurs via the reaction that we call the Maillard reaction. And it goes by a few other names as well, but chefs know this Maillard reaction because they use it in some of their cooking processes. So exposing meats and proteins to sugar, given enough heat and time, will actually cook those proteins. When you brown the outside of a steak, for instance, that can occur much easier when you put some sugar or carbohydrate on that. Same thing with bread. So when you start bread, cooking it, if you put like a little bit of egg on there too, it will make it more brown as you cook it in the oven. But even without that, when you start off, the bread is white and fluffy and soft, and then you put it in the oven for however long. If it's hot enough, it will burn and make the outside very brown and crispy and also hard. And that's kind of the same thing that's happening in the body. So that Maillard reaction or glycation that's occurring in these cooking processes is also similar to what's going on in your body. So when you have insulin resistance, your tissues are not accepting the glucose into the tissues quickly enough. As a result, the insulin has to go up, but during that time, there's sort of a delay, and the glucose is higher, and that glucose is interacting with the proteins of your body, tissue proteins of your body. In particular, this seems to be more pronounced in like the microvessels of the body. These are the vessels that deliver blood to like the nerves and the eyes, and you can get damaging to those nerves and in the eyes. And this is why sometimes if you're not getting your blood sugar checked regularly or getting a thorough checkup, sometimes this is the first symptom that may show up, is like numbness in your feet, or you go to the eye doctor and all of a sudden you have eye problems. I've seen this in several cases, patients that come in that found out they might have diabetes after going to the eye doctor and finding that there's retinopathy occurring, which is a problem that happens in diabetics. So point being, the microvessels are oftentimes the first part of the diabetes process that shows up as a symptom when you're having insulin resistance. So insulin resistance and diabetes kind of go hand in hand, and these two are commonly seen in diabetics, retinopathy and peripheral neuropathy. Now, if you keep your glucose under control, those things won't happen, but it's something that's pretty common to see. Before we talk about insulin, I just wanted to quickly also mention that hemoglobin A1C is a measurement tool to identify when you have high blood sugar, and that process, the way that we are able to identify when you have high blood sugar through the hemoglobin A1C process occurs through this glycation. So the hemoglobin molecule actually gets cooked by this extra glucose, and you're able to approximate what the blood sugar level is down to a fairly precise idea. It's an estimate, but it's pretty accurate, and identify what your average blood sugar is for 3 months, because those hemoglobin molecules are being glycated in a certain percent based on how high your blood sugar is. So just wanted to tie that in as well. So now let's look at insulin in a little more depth and how it's affecting the tissues of the body. So insulin is a growth and storage signal to the tissues of the body. As we said, insulin must go up when there's higher glucose in the body or in the blood. And the higher glucose occurs when the body's storage tissues, storage areas become overly full or unable to accept more glucose. With the increased insulin, though, the cells and tissues are kind of forced into accepting it, and they expand and grow. This is particularly important or particularly pronounced in the visceral area or abdominal area of the body. That's where insulin is most sensitive, and it causes these tissues, the visceral tissue, visceral fat in particular, to grow and expand. And as we mentioned, the higher insulin often causes the larger arteries of the body kind of grow and expand, and it affects the macrovasculature, like the arteries of the heart, etc. So as the insulin's going up, it's affecting the abdominal tissue, and that insulin's penetrating everywhere in the body, but it seems to show up as affecting the visceral fat and also the large vessels of the artery, because of course that's what's carrying the insulin. Coupled with this, the macrovessels are getting affected by the higher glucose, and so you're getting some of that glycation occurring, which makes them less pliable, hardening, plus the arteries, the inner part of the arteries are probably growing too. And so you can get this sort of enlarging of the arteries, thickening of the arteries, and hardening of the arteries. And over time, that creates a very dangerous or problematic situation, especially when it comes to the heart, because that's where those vessels also supply the blood to the heart. And if they get too thin, the lumen of the artery gets too thin because it's getting thicker and pushed closer together by the insulin that's making the vessels grow. There's not enough room for the blood to flow through there and deliver the nutrients and oxygen and things that the heart needs to continue to pump. And so that leads to heart attacks and other problems in other areas of the body. So now keep in mind, in answering the question, what does insulin resistance do to the body, we're sort of putting it into these two categories. We mentioned the microvessels and the macrovessels, but these effects of glycation and insulin is happening all over the body in other areas as well. We're just sort of looking at what's known about what happens with insulin, what's known about what happens with glucose and glycation. But anywhere higher insulin is, you're going to have this this growth signal, and anywhere you have this higher glucose, you're going to have some of that glycation occurring in the tissue or proteins in that. So that's all I had for this video. What does insulin resistance do to the body? Hopefully you liked the video. If you did, click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.